We start this hour as British Cabinet Minister Peter Kyle has said in an interview that Britain supports eventual recognition of a Palestinian state, but the immediate priority should be alleviating the suffering in Gaza and securing a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. Let's now listen to the British Science and Technology Minister.
So it is a manifesto commitment of this government that we want to establish statehood for Palestine. It needs to happen in a way that will be empowering and deliver the long-term peace and stability that Palestine needs. Sovereignty exists for a reason, and we need to make sure that that sovereignty can be exercised at the moment of attaining statehood. That is our purpose. So we are absolutely driven to end the suffering that we see today. We've got to act with every word we use, with international support, to get the food and the support into starving people who are starving in Gaza and suffering in Gaza today. But we will not forget the diplomatic challenges that we have and the diplomatic efforts that will be needed to deliver the statehood that they need, that Palestine needs, and that Israel needs when it comes to its security. This can only be delivered by a diplomatic solution. We need the ceasefire. We are calling for a ceasefire. And then, of course, we will do everything we can from a position of a supporter for the region to get the circumstances where there's negotiations for the long-term statehood in Palestine and security for the region that they need.
Well, these comments come after French President Emmanuel Macron said France intends to recognise a Palestinian state in September at the UN General Assembly, a plan that reportedly drew strong condemnation from Israel and the United States. In a statement on July the 24th, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer had also said that statehood was inalienable rights of the Palestinian people, reiterating his call for a ceasefire as a necessary step towards achieving a two-state solution. Well, joining us to discuss these latest comments from politicians in the UK and, of course, France, Professor Kobi Michael, a senior researcher at the INSS and Misgav Institute, who's joining us live from Israel. Thank you ever so much, Professor Michael, for taking the time to speak with us. We've seen in recent days, of course, more nations speaking out against Israel and also speaking out about the situation currently going on in Gaza. We know that Benjamin Netanyahu has been persistent in pushing forward with his aims, which of course is returning all the hostages currently being held both dead and alive by Hamas, but also making sure that an attack like the devastating, horrific attack of October the 7th is not repeated. Do you think that these comments from politicians will have any sway on Benjamin Netanyahu, or will he continue with his plan despite mounting global pressure?
Hello, thank you for having me. The problem is not Benjamin Netanyahu and the declarations that were made by Benjamin Netanyahu. The problem is Hamas. And the idea that Hamas prefers almost 3 weeks to remain in its position, not to reach to an agreement, although Israel did much more than once concessions, and although all the mediators, be it the Egyptians, the Qatarians, and the Americans, are saying that the only obstacle now in front of an agreement is Hamas, and although the situation, at least according to Hamas Ministry of Health, is not less than catastrophic in the Gaza Strip, they have their time and they have their demands, and they are not willing to reach to an agreement. So the problem is not Benjamin Netanyahu, the problem is Hamas. And I think that all the allegations and all the pressures from the international media, from the international community, should be addressed solely to Hamas.
Professor Michael, of course we know that Iran was weakened with military and nuclear facilities targeted during that 12-day war by Israel and then the United States. And we've also seen, of course, military action within the Gaza Strip from Israel, which has impacted Hamas. We can acknowledge that Hamas is weaker than when they launched those devastating October 7th attacks, the mass killings and hostage takes. Is there some understanding, do you think, from the Israeli government that a ceasefire could be a possibility, given the fact that Hamas are now so much weaker than they were which then could potentially lead to a further ceasefire and also end the devastating situation in Gaza that's being reported by so many groups. Tens of thousands of civilian casualties reported, issues with malnourishment of children also being reported. Yes, Hamas have started this conflict, but is it not part of the process that Israel maybe look at the current situation for children who we know can't be parts of Hamas given their tender age and the suffering they might be facing?
I recommend that we will not confuse ourselves with regard to Hamas. Although Hamas is much weaker today in comparison to what Hamas was until October 7th, Hamas is still there. It is still an effective sovereign in the Gaza Strip. It still controls territory and most of the population. And Hamas leadership continues believing in their political, religious, ideological, national vision where the state of Israel does not exist. They do not intend to dismantle themselves. They do not intend to leave the Gaza Strip, and they do not intend to give up on their potential influence on the next civilian government in the Gaza Strip. And therefore, Israel cannot afford itself that Hamas will remain in any shape, in any form, as a governmental or a military entity in the Gaza Strip. And this is exactly the reason for the unbridgeable gap between Israel and Hamas, where Israel is willing to cease the war, to end the war by releasing all the hostages and by dismantling Hamas and evacuating the Gaza Strip from Hamas, okay, or enforcing Hamas to leave the Gaza Strip and to enable a new civilian governance and the beginning of the reconstruction process and the prosperity for the Gazans. Hamas is not willing to leave the Gaza Strip, and Hamas is not willing to end the war and to release all the hostages and to leave the Gaza Strip or to dismantle itself. This is exactly the gap. The gap is unbridgeable, and therefore I believe that even if we will reach to an agreement now in Doha with Hamas, which is a partial agreement for 60 days, I do not believe that we will be able to reach or to realize the second phase of this agreement or negotiation because the gaps remains unbridgeable. And therefore, I believe that the only valid solution is to occupy the Gaza Strip, to finalize the dismantling of Hamas, to enable the formation and the establishment of a new civilian governance, and to begin the reconstruction process where Hamas is not there in the Gaza Strip. I see no other option.
Yes, Professor Michael, I do understand what you were saying, and of course it takes two sides to agree to this ceasefire deal. Of course, Israel agreed to the Witkoff proposal that would see a partial hostage release, a 60-day ceasefire and a partial retreat of Israeli forces, but still some presence in the Gaza Strip. I'm conscious of what you said as we do bring an end to this discussion. I'm conscious of what you said about completely occupying Gaza, that being the only way that Israel can guarantee that Hamas, of course, won't repeat this attack. But at what cost? Humanitarian relief, of course, is an issue. How many civilian lives in Palestine need to be ended in order for this situation to be resolved from an Israeli point of view? Is the Palestinian casualty numbers that we're hearing being reported irrelevant to Israel and the government, given the fact that the mission is still ongoing, and it seems that unless there is a concrete ceasefire, it will continue, with more reports of deaths around aid centres continuously over the past few weeks?
I will try to reply by using, I would say, two explanations. The first one is that I believe that the idea of, or the rationale of occupying the entire Gaza Strip, not in order to remain there, okay, but in order to assure the dismantling of Hamas, will be resulted with a cheaper price with regard to casualties of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. It will be much cheaper than the continuation of the current situation. Secondly, in a war, and unfortunately we are in a war, the first aim or the first objective or the first obligation that you have is to win, to defeat your enemy. This is the first obligation that the state and the responsible state has vis-a-vis its own citizens. So the obligation of Israel is to defeat Hamas, okay? And to make the utmost efforts in order to prevent or to minimize collateral damage. This war could have been ended on October 8th, almost 2 years ago. This war is not ended, not because of Israel, but because of Hamas. And although, as you have mentioned before, Hamas is much weaker, they believe that they are able to reconstitute themselves and to be much stronger. If they wouldn't have believed, they wouldn't have insisted, okay, in this negotiation. They believe that they are with the upper hand. They believe that the time works in favor of them. They see interviews like that all over the world. They see the international media. They see the international pressures on Israel. They see the domestic, the internal disputes in the very vital Israeli democracy, and they believe that they will be able to defeat the state of Israel and to make another 7 October. And by the way, this is not my interpretation. This is exactly what Hamas leaders say repeatedly, that the October 7th attack of 2023 is only the first one, and they are going to repeat it, and they are going to do it again and again and again until they will eliminate the state of Israel. And they are backed by Iran until these days. They are backed by Qatar until these days. They are backed by Turkey until these days. And unfortunately, they are backed by the international media and by international organizations, mainly the United States, the United Nations, that should have been dismantled long ago.
Professor Kobi Michael, thank you ever so much for your time and providing those opinions and insights. We will, of course, continue to bring